guys! For those of you who are new here, hi, I'm Clayfect, and today we are going to make a dragon that I burnt into a crisp. I am going to tell you the whole story about that, and believe me, there is a story. Plus, I'm going to tell you a bit more about dragons in general, and we got to see them through Clayfect eyes. All while I sculpt the little one. So as you might have guessed, there is a lot to cover. So without further ado, guys, let's just get started.
He took 100 pounds of clay, and then he said, hey listen, I'm gonna fix this world today, because I know what's missing.
To begin with, what is missing is the base of the body, and we're going to build that up with some aluminium foil, wire, and thereafter some clay to shape out the body. Now, I was pretty nervous and very much in doubt if I even should make another dragon, because it's not that long ago that I made a dragon with Mr. Clayfect. And I don't know if it's the time of year or anything like that, but my views have gone down, and I do understand that people have much else to do than look at me whopping on some clay, but still it puts the pressure on when you're trying to create something, because you want to create something people are interested in and can relate to. And the pressure of getting more and more views, comments and so on are really there if you are serious about your channel. I have to say that. But then again, I couldn't get this picture of this little golden baby dragon in a European style this time out of my head. So I simply bent my head down and start getting to work, and I really hope you're going to enjoy this. When I was satisfied with our baby dragon's body shape, then I switched over to make some claws out of translucent clay that are pre-baked, which will make things a lot easier when I start working on the legs. And while I do that, why don't I tell you a bit more about the dragon history? A quick disclaimer though, I am not an expert on dragons or any other kind of fantasy creature. I am simply a girl that has access to Google. So please don't come for me. But with that being said, guys, let me tell you about the dragon. One of the most known and oldest fantasy and mythological creatures is probably the dragon. How it looks and what its purpose is really depends on where you are in the world. But if we're going back to some of the first recordings of stories with dragon in them, then we have to go back to Greece and watch stories about the Hydra, linked down in the description below, and so on. There it was more like a serpent than actually what we think of as a dragon, and it was mostly to either guard something precious or to keep someone out of a specific area they were used. So they were pretty much like a snake guard dog, if you can say that. Then things were much more simple back in the medieval days here in Europe and Scandinavia. Here they looked more like a dinosaur than a serpent, and it wasn't as much as a guard dog as it was just an evil beast that needed to be slain, vandalizing villages and stealing princesses. Sometimes it was a knight in shining armor, sometimes it was a simple farmer's boy that wanted to be king, and other times religion got its scrappy little hands into it, and it was saints that slayed these dragons. It was also about that time in Scotland, Ireland and England that they started to distinguish between a wyvern and the common dragon, where the wyvern only have 2 legs and then wings, and a dragon of course have 4 legs. But overall across Europe, the dragons was basically this vile monster that needed to be murdered the most brutal way possible. Which is why I will give it title as a baby monster, since I am from Denmark. But then again, if we go to the eastern part of the world, our poor little fantasy creatures had it a lot easier. There, the dragon was not as much as a monster as it was a celestial creature. In Japan, they were known as Ryu and had almost god-like powers. There, they were a symbol of wisdom and longevity and was associated strongly with the emperor. And that is what I know in short about the dragons. There is so much lore, so many histories, so many stories about these fantastic serpent, lizard, dragon creatures. So I could go on and on about them, but I think it's time that we get back to the sculpture, where we have given our little one a tail and now are detailing him with some folds. Now I give him folds here and there simply to give the effect that he has loose skin, again to emphasize this baby look, just like a puppy has a little bit too much skin. Before I go on to detailing his stomach, cutting out some thin pieces of super sculpting, before I place them like he has an armor plate on his belly like a traditional dragon. Except for the wings, I pretty much sculpt our little one in one go. And that's because one of the reasons I wanted to make a dragon was because I wanted to become better at making scales and lizard-like texture. I am pretty adept when it comes to making fur, but still I am a new artist and I still have a lot to learn, and I use every opportunity that I have to do just that. So while I'm working on the front legs and start building up the head, why don't I tell you a little bit more about Burni? Yeah, I decided to call him Burni, you're going to see why later. Plus, we got to see the dragon through Clayfect eyes. I cannot even begin to describe how repulsed I am of how medieval Europe and Scandinavia saw dragons. It is just wrong on so many levels. So the dragon is big and can do a lot of damage. But so what? A horse is also big and can do a lot of damage and have a mentality like a cat. But we don't blame them for being who they are. And yeah, the dragon is sort of bigger than a horse and it can spew fire. But again, it's a defense mechanism. Who's to blame them? Try to see it from their perspective. Would you be in the best mood if you had heartburn all the time? No, of course not. So why are we blaming the dragons? They have it tough enough. Story shows that they can be good and kind creatures. Just like our little Burni. He would never set fire to anything on purpose, and he's even too young to actually be able to breathe fire. Unless he gets spicy food. And unfortunately, his favorite food is Mexican food. So that is sort of a problem, and he really enjoys the sight of fire. But he would never on purpose hurt anyone. He's a curious, friendly little fella, which actually gave his parents a lot of problems because he is a gold dragon, and their skin in many fantasy games and movies are very rare. So he often put himself in dangerous positions, and maybe his parents have to turn a few hunters into charcoal in order to protect him. But Burni himself, he doesn't spew fire, he burps fire, and only when Mexican food is involved. Which he eats quite a lot because he is a spoiled boy. But other than that, he is just fine. And that's what I know about Burni and his backstory. Now back to the sculpture, where I give him some bumps that is soon to become nostrils, before I move on to give him some clay doodads that is soon to become eyebrows. All it takes is a bit of smoothing, and then we're pretty much ready to place the head. Before we work on any more head details, simply not to squeeze what we have already done. Now, when you're making a figure in one bake like I'm doing here, you always have to think of where can I touch, where can I not touch, and where can I mess something up. That is why I am building the sculpture up in the order that I am. Now, for our little Burni, I wanted him to look friendly and curious. That is why I made it look like he sort of stretched his neck while looking at you, and also why I put him in this puppy-like pose I did. Now with his head safely and secured on his neck, I start working on some more details, giving him some horns that I had laying around in cosplay. Though that doesn't stop me from making more spikes later on, simply because the spikes that I had pre-baked were too pointy and I want this baby look, so it's more like a cone than a spike for this little fella. Speaking of spikes, while I'm giving this head some more details, why don't I tell you how I managed to burn my sculpture? Believe it or not, it actually involves spikes. So because I have my sclerosis, I have a service dog, or a service dog trainee, you might have called it. I am not sure she's ever going to graduate. Called Kyra. And Kyra is an angel in disguise. Really, she has brightened my life so much. But she's not the brightest herself, which she proved the other day. Because when I called her in from the garden, she came in with a deep, bloody wound on her head. And me being this overprotective dog mama that I am, just completely panicked. I just was so afraid that she got brain damage or she was going to pass away or anything like that, because there wasn't much to damage to start with. So I was panicking when I called the vet and got a time. And it was in that time period, while I was waiting for our vet appointment, that I managed to burn poor Burni into a crisp. Now I have to pause the story, and I do realize that I am an evil devil woman for that, because you are emotionally invested in knowing what's going on with my dog, but right now with the sculpture I'm actually doing something interesting. Well, not right now, I'm just making spikes as I told you I would, but after the spikes, I actually make a texture tool myself for the first time, and I think it actually turned out pretty great. Now I try to draw on the scales one by one, but it quickly became this clumpy, lumpy, uneven mess, so that is why I had to make a texture tool. So while I give our little dragon some much needed texture, and bake it for the first time where it doesn't burn, why don't we continue with the story about Kyra? Thankfully, her thick skull had blocked the spike that had poked her in the head, so she managed to get away with it only with a few stitches and a very funny haircut. So all is well and fine with Kyra, thankfully. But that left us with the question, what have done this to our poor dog? But when we inspected the garden, then we quickly realized she did this to herself. You see, very back in our backyard, so to speak, we have a very old greenhouse. And for some reason, our genius golden retriever decided to try to dig under the greenhouse. And she did such a fine job with her digging, so it's semi-collapsed, throwing glass down on her head, and that is why. And to make matters worse, I of course, like the overprotected dog mom I just admitted I am, demanded that Mr. Clayfect tore that darn greenhouse down. And while he was doing just that, of course more glass managed to shatter, scratching his face up. Thankfully, he's also fine. But that doesn't change the fact that this week 2 of my family members managed to get bested by a greenhouse. But all is well that ends well. They are okay, and I wasn't even sad about burning my sculpture, because thankfully I did the smart thing and just left the sculpture to cool down in the oven, so it cooled down very slowly, minimizing how many cracks there was going to be. Now, it's not all the time you can save a burnt sculpture, but thankfully I could. By sanding down the wings with some Scotch-Brite, before I filled all the small cracks with a little bit of super glue, so it wasn't even going to be noticeable at all when the paint was on. So even though he looked pretty burnt now, I am very happy and are dancing with him, also because that gave me the idea to call him Burni and help me out with the color palette for the paint. Now I knew I wanted a gold baby dragon. That is why you see me using a dark gold speed paint as a base for Burni. But I also wanted to embrace where he came from, the trials that he had gone through. So instead of just making a boring gold dragon, I also put in some copper and various shades of red, gold and copper, all in order to give him sort of this gold dragon burnt look. I call it 50 Shades of Gold. Now there is probably just as much copper color and metal red color as gold color, but it doesn't sound half as catchy. So this is the 50 Shades of Gold dragon Burni. So I for once actually had fun painting, especially when all the base colors was down and I got my bright gold out, because I simply dry brushed it all over the body of our little dragon, and I just thought it looked so cool, and especially because it looks more like I'm polishing him up rather than painting him. And when he was more shiny than a sweaty bald man's head, I finally started giving some burnt details with a copper brown I dry brushed all the places he had been burnt the most, sort of a subtle detail to his history. But with that done, all I needed to do was paint his horn in a metallic orange before I cracked open the matte paints and painted the bottom of his feet and the inside of his ears, which I thought was a nice contrast because I wanted it to look like a living, breathing creature and not just a shiny statue. But with all of that out of the way, he just needed a bit of cleanup. And I think that is it for this sculpture and it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you like little Burni. I am just in love with him, not only because of his background story or all the drama that went on when I created him, but also because he is so shiny. Just look at him. Isn't he just cute? He's also for me a nice reminder that even though everything can go wrong, if you continue and you push through it, then there will be a happy ending. Or death, depending on how you look at it, I guess. Anyway, with that being said, guys, it's time for me to sign off. I hope to see you next time, but if you can wait until next time, why not click on the square to the right? Then you're going to see another cute little monster get made. But until then, bye!